The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering against the polished marble floor of the summit grill as my sister Natalie's words cut through the congratulatory dinner chatter like a blade through silk. "Let's be honest, Zoe," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone of condescending pity that had haunted our family gatherings for years. "While everyone else here is building real careers, you're still playing around with your little art projects on a laptop. Some people are just meant to dream small." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The entire Harper family table fell silent. 15 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some filled with uncomfortable sympathy, others barely concealing their agreement with Natalie's brutal assessment. The celebration dinner for her recent promotion to Senior Marketing Director at TechFlow Solutions had just transformed into my public execution, and she was holding the axe with perfectly manicured hands. "My name is Zoe Harper, I'm 28 years old, and for the past 3 years, I've been living what most people would consider a modest life as a freelance graphic designer. What my family doesn't know, what nobody except my accountant and lawyer know, is that I've been hiding a secret so enormous it would reshape everything they think they understand about success, failure, and the quiet girl who supposedly never amounted to anything." The evening had started like every other Harper family gathering over the past 5 years. Our parents, Robert and Carol Harper, had reserved the private dining room at Denver's most exclusive restaurant to celebrate what they called another milestone in Natalie's remarkable career trajectory. The room buzzed with the kind of animated conversation that only flows when successful people gather to congratulate each other on being successful. Natalie held court at the head of the table, her designer blazer catching the warm glow of the Edison bulb chandelier above us. She had spent the first hour of dinner regaling everyone with stories about her latest marketing campaign victories, her corner office with mountain views, and her growing influence within TechFlow Solutions. "The CEO personally told me I'm indispensable," she had announced between bites of her artisanal salmon. "He said the company's growth trajectory wouldn't be possible without my strategic vision." I sat quietly at the far end of the table, picking at my salad while relatives I saw twice a year peppered Natalie with questions about her glamorous corporate life. My cousin Marcus asked about her travel budget for client meetings. Aunt Linda wanted to know about her stock options. Uncle Tom inquired whether she'd considered starting her own consulting firm with all her industry connections. Through it all, I remained the invisible sister, the one whose greatest achievement in their eyes was managing to pay rent on my small apartment in Denver's Arts District while doing what they generously called creative work. When family members occasionally remembered to include me in conversations, their questions carried a distinctly different tone. "How's the freelance thing going?" they'd ask with the kind of forced enthusiasm typically reserved for children's finger paintings. "Are you keeping busy with projects?" I had learned years ago to deflect these inquiries with vague responses about client work and creative fulfillment. What I couldn't tell them was that my freelance graphic design business was merely a cover story, a convenient explanation for why I worked from home, kept irregular hours, and never seemed particularly stressed about money despite having no obvious source of substantial income. The truth was far more complex. 6 years ago, fresh out of college with a computer science degree I'd earned while everyone assumed I was studying art, I had started developing automation software for small businesses. What began as a side project to help a local restaurant manage inventory had evolved into something much larger. Working 16-hour days from my tiny studio apartment, surviving on coffee and determination, I had created a suite of business management tools that could revolutionize how mid-sized companies handled everything from payroll to customer relationship management. But I didn't want to be the face of a tech company. I didn't want the spotlight, the networking events, or the pressure of being a young female CEO in a male-dominated industry. Instead, I had done something unconventional. I had sold my software to an existing company, retained controlling ownership through a complex web of shell corporations and legal structures, and stepped back into the shadows to let others run the day-to-day operations while I continued developing and improving the technology that powered everything. That company was TechFlow Solutions. The same TechFlow Solutions where my sister Natalie worked as senior marketing director, completely unaware that her little sister owned the entire operation. For 3 years I had watched Natalie climb the corporate ladder at my company, attending her celebrations and listening to her stories about the brilliant leadership team and innovative products that were driving TechFlow's unprecedented growth. She had no idea that the software she was marketing, the success she was celebrating, and the job security she bragged about all existed because of the sister she considered a perpetual disappointment. The irony was delicious, but tonight it was about to become something more. Tonight, as Natalie's words echoed in my mind, some people are just meant to dream small. I felt something shift inside me. The time for quiet anonymity was ending. You know what your problem is, Zoe, Natalie continued, apparently not finished with her character assassination. She had reached that particular level of wine-enhanced confidence that made her feel qualified to offer life advice to everyone within earshot. You've never understood what it takes to succeed in the real world. Business isn't about making pretty pictures and hoping someone notices. It's about strategy, execution, and results. She gestured grandly toward herself, as if she were Exhibit A in the Museum of Professional Accomplishment. Look at what I've built at TechFlow. When I started there 5 years ago, the company was barely scraping by with outdated systems and no clear marketing direction. Now we're one of the fastest growing tech companies in Colorado, and I've been instrumental in every major campaign that got us here. Brandon Torres, one of Natalie's colleagues from TechFlow who had been invited to witness her moment of glory, nodded enthusiastically. Natalie's absolutely right, he chimed in, clearly hoping to score points with his superior. The transformation at TechFlow has been incredible to watch. The leadership team has this amazing vision for business automation software, and Natalie's marketing strategies have been crucial in bringing that vision to market. I almost choked on my water. The amazing vision he was praising so effusively was literally sitting across the table from him, wearing a thrift store dress and getting lectured about dreaming small. But I maintained my composure, offering only a polite smile while internally marveling at how completely oblivious they were to the reality of the situation. The thing is, Natalie continued, apparently building to some grand point about life lessons and personal responsibility. Success requires sacrifice. It requires putting in the hours, building relationships, and proving yourself in environments where failure isn't an option. You can't just sit at home doodling and expect the world to reward you for participating. Our mother Carol shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Despite her obvious pride in Natalie's achievements, she had always maintained a soft spot for her quieter daughter. Now Natalie, she said gently, Zoe works very hard on her projects. Creative work is valuable too. Natalie waved dismissively. Mom, I love Zoe, but someone needs to tell her the truth. She's 28 years old and still living like she's in college. When I was her age, I was already making strategic decisions that affected entire market segments. She's making business cards and flyers for local shops. The assessment stung, not because it was cruel, though it certainly was, but because it revealed how completely Natalie had bought into her own narrative about being the successful sister and me being the dreamer who never grew up. She genuinely believed that her marketing role at TechFlow represented some pinnacle of business achievement, while my apparent freelance design work marked me as someone who had failed to launch into the real world. What made the moment even more surreal was watching Brandon nod along with her assessment while sitting in a restaurant, eating food, and celebrating a promotion that existed entirely because of software I had created during those supposed college years, she was dismissing so casually. I think what Natalie's trying to say, our father Robert interjected, clearly attempting to diffuse the growing tension, is that different people find success in different ways. We're proud of both our daughters. But Natalie was on a roll now, emboldened by wine and what she perceived as family support for her tough love approach. Dad being supportive doesn't mean pretending that all choices are equally valid. Zoe has talent, I'll give her that, but talent without ambition and business sense is just a hobby. She could be doing so much more with her life if she'd just stop hiding behind her computer and start engaging with the real world. The real world, I had to suppress a laugh at that phrase. If only she knew how deeply engaged I was with the real world, how the software powering her own professional success was the result of my engagement with market needs, technological solutions, and business strategy that went far beyond anything she encountered in her marketing role. You want to know what real success looks like? Natalie asked, apparently deciding that her earlier points hadn't been sufficiently devastating. It's about building something larger than yourself. At TechFlow, I'm not just doing a job, I'm helping to transform entire industries through innovative technology solutions. Our automation software is revolutionizing how businesses operate, and I get to be part of that revolution every single day. She paused for dramatic effect, making sure everyone at the table was paying attention to her words. That's the difference between us, so. You're content to be a small player in a small pond, making modest money on small projects. I'm part of something bigger, something that actually matters in the world. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a butter knife. Here was my sister, lecturing me about the importance of building something larger than myself, while describing in glowing terms the company I had built from nothing and continued to own completely. She was praising the revolutionary impact of software I had written, calling it innovative technology that was transforming industries, while simultaneously dismissing me as someone who lacked the vision and ambition to engage with meaningful work. But what struck me most wasn't the irony, it was the genuine conviction in her voice. Natalie truly believed every word she was saying. She had constructed a narrative about our respective places in the world that cast her as the successful strategic thinker and me as the artistic dreamer who had never learned to compete in serious professional environments. This wasn't just sibling rivalry or momentary cruelty, it was a deeply held worldview that had shaped how she saw herself and her achievements. As I looked around the table at my family members' faces, I could see that most of them shared some version of Natalie's assessment. They loved me certainly, but they also pitied me. In their minds I represented potential that had never been properly realized, talent that had never been channeled into anything substantial or impressive.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
They saw Natalie's corporate success as evidence of superior drive and business acumen, while viewing my quiet lifestyle as proof that I had somehow failed to grow up and join the adult world of serious professional achievement. The waiter arrived to refill our wine glasses, providing a momentary break in what was becoming an increasingly uncomfortable conversation. I used the pause to study Natalie's face, noting the flush of pride and alcohol, the confident set of her shoulders, the way she commanded attention from everyone at the table. She had worked hard to reach her position at TechFlow, and she deserved credit for the energy and enthusiasm she brought to marketing my software. But she had also built her entire sense of professional identity around being part of something she didn't realize she had no actual control over. I hope you understand I'm saying this because I care about you. Natalie continued, her voice taking on a tone of sisterly concern that somehow managed to be even more condescending than her earlier criticisms. You're smart, Zoe, you're creative. But you're wasting your potential by refusing to engage with the business world in any meaningful way. You could be so much more than you are. Brandon nodded sagely, apparently feeling qualified to offer his own assessment of my life choices. The tech industry is always looking for creative talent, he added helpfully. Maybe Zoe could apply for an entry-level position at TechFlow. We could put in a good word with the hiring manager. The suggestion was so perfectly absurd, the idea that I might need their recommendation to get an entry-level job at my own company, that I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Instead I managed a polite smile, and thanked them for thinking of me, while internally marveling at how completely they had missed the reality of the situation. As the evening wound down and family members began making plans to leave, Natalie pulled me aside near the restaurant's entrance. The Denver skyline glittered beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, and for a moment we stood together in relative quiet, while the rest of our family gathered their coats and purses. I know I was hard on you tonight, she said, her voice softer now that we were alone. But I really do want what's best for you. You have so much potential, and it kills me to see you settling for less than you could achieve. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw someone who had worked genuinely hard to build what she believed was a successful career. She had thrown herself into her role at TechFlow with impressive dedication, developing marketing strategies and building client relationships with real skill and enthusiasm. The fact that she was ultimately marketing software I had created didn't diminish her efforts or her talents. But it did make her condescending assessment of my ambitions and achievements particularly galling. I appreciate your concern, I told her, choosing my words carefully. Really I do, but I think you might be surprised by what I've actually accomplished. She smiled with the kind of gentle tolerance typically reserved for delusional relatives. Zoe, honey, I'm sure your design work brings you personal satisfaction, and that's wonderful. But there's a difference between personal fulfillment and professional success. I just want you to experience what it feels like to be part of something bigger than yourself. As we walked to our cars in the restaurant's parking garage, I found myself thinking about timing. For 3 years I had been content to remain in the shadows, letting others take credit for building and running TechFlow, while I focused on the technical development that actually drove everything. I had told myself that anonymity was preferable to the spotlight, that I was more effective working behind the scenes than I would be as a public-facing CEO. But tonight had changed something fundamental. Listening to Natalie dismiss my ambitions while praising the success of my own company, watching her lecture me about the importance of engaging with meaningful work while describing software I had created as revolutionary, it had crystallized a realization that had been building for months. It was time for the truth to come out. Not just for my own satisfaction, though I had to admit the prospect of seeing Natalie's face when she learned who really owned TechFlow was appealingly dramatic. More importantly, it was time for me to stop hiding behind the comfortable fiction that I was just a freelance designer with modest ambitions. I had built something remarkable. I had created technology that was genuinely transforming how businesses operated, and I had done it while maintaining the kind of work-life balance that most entrepreneurs could only dream about. I had proven that success didn't have to look like corner offices and networking events and constant self-promotion. But I had also proven it so quietly that even my own family had no idea what I had accomplished. As I drove home through Denver's late-night streets, I made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow I would start making arrangements for a revelation that would redefine not just how my family saw me, but how I saw myself. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. Natalie thought she understood the difference between small dreams and big achievements. She was about to discover just how wrong she could be. The morning after the dinner debacle, I sat in my home office staring at 3 computer monitors displaying real-time analytics from TechFlow Solutions. Revenue streams, user engagement metrics, and deployment statistics painted a picture of sustained growth that would make any business owner proud. What made the data particularly satisfying was knowing that Natalie was probably in her corner office at this very moment, preparing presentations about marketing strategies for software I had architected during late nights in this same room. My coffee had gone cold as I scrolled through the detailed reports my development team sent every Monday morning. The team consisted of 12 brilliant engineers scattered across 4 time zones, none of whom knew they were reporting to the quiet woman their colleague's sister dismissed as lacking professional ambition. They knew me only as Zoe Harper, the mysterious lead developer who communicated primarily through encrypted channels and somehow always knew exactly which technical challenges needed solving before they became critical problems. The irony of my situation had become a source of daily amusement over the past 3 years. While Natalie attended endless meetings about market positioning and competitive analysis, I spent my mornings reviewing code commits, approving architecture decisions, and occasionally jumping into complex debugging sessions that kept our enterprise clients happy. While she networked at industry conferences and posted LinkedIn updates about thought leadership, I was quietly revolutionizing business automation from my cluttered home office in a building most people would consider slightly shabby. But the amusement was beginning to wear thin. Last night's humiliation had ignited something deeper than bruised pride. For years I had convinced myself that staying hidden was the mature choice, that proving myself to family members who couldn't see beyond traditional markers of success wasn't worth the complications that would come with revealing my actual role in the business world. I had told myself that Natalie's ignorance about my achievements was irrelevant as long as I found personal fulfillment in my work. That rationalization felt increasingly hollow as I replayed her words from the previous evening. The casual cruelty of suggesting I was wasting my potential, the assumption that I lacked the drive to engage with meaningful work, the implication that my lifestyle represented some kind of failure to launch into adult responsibilities, all of it rankled more than I had expected. Not because I doubted my own accomplishments, but because her dismissive attitude reflected a broader misunderstanding about what success actually looked like. I opened my laptop and began drafting an email to Patricia Vance, TechFlow's chief operating officer and the only person in the company's leadership structure who knew my true identity. Patricia had been my first hire after I decided to transition from solo developer to actual business owner, and she had proved invaluable in building the operational infrastructure that allowed me to remain behind the scenes while still maintaining ultimate control over strategic decisions. Patricia, I typed, I think it's time we discussed bringing the ownership structure into the open. Please schedule a company-wide meeting for Thursday afternoon. Tell the leadership team we'll be announcing some organizational changes that will affect reporting structures and long-term planning. Don't provide any additional details until I arrive. I hesitated before hitting send, knowing that this simple email would set in motion a series of events that would fundamentally alter my relationship with my family, my company, and my own sense of professional identity. For 3 years, I had enjoyed the luxury of operating without public scrutiny, making decisions based purely on technical merit and business logic, without having to worry about managing my image or defending my choices to people who might not understand them. But as I thought about Natalie's confident assertion that I needed to learn what it meant to be part of something larger than myself, I realized that my anonymity had become a form of cowardice. I had built something genuinely significant, something that was improving efficiency and profitability for hundreds of businesses across multiple industries. The software platform I had developed was being used by companies from Denver to Detroit, streamlining operations and eliminating tedious manual processes that had frustrated business owners for decades. Yet because I had chosen to remain invisible, the credit for these innovations was being attributed to a vague leadership team that included people like Natalie, who had no understanding of the technical complexities that made their marketing efforts possible. More problematically, my own family had concluded that I was someone who lacked the ambition or capability to contribute meaningfully to the business world, despite the fact that I had created more economic value in my spare bedroom than most MBAs generated in entire careers. The email sent with a soft whoosh, and I leaned back in my chair to consider the implications of what I had just initiated. By Thursday afternoon, everyone at TechFlow would know that their mysterious and rarely seen owner was actually the sister of their senior marketing director. Natalie would discover that the company she considered her professional home, the success story she had built her identity around, existed entirely because of the sister she had spent years encouraging to be more ambitious. I spent the rest of Monday morning reviewing personnel files, trying to gauge how different team members might react to learning about my actual role in the company. Natalie's file made for particularly interesting reading. Her performance reviews were consistently positive, highlighting her creativity in developing marketing campaigns and her skill at building relationships with potential clients. Her supervisors praised her enthusiasm and her ability to translate complex technical features into compelling value propositions for business customers. Reading through 3 years of documentation about her professional growth, I felt a complicated mix of pride and frustration. Pride because she had genuinely excelled in her role, bringing energy and insight to marketing challenges that required someone who could think strategically about customer needs and competitive positioning. Frustration because her success was being built on a foundation she completely misunderstood, and because she had used that partial success to position herself as an authority on professional achievement while dismissing my own accomplishments. The situation reminded me of something I had learned during my computer science studies about the difference between implementation and interface. Users could interact with sophisticated software systems without understanding the underlying code that made those interactions possible. They could appreciate the elegant simplicity of a user interface without recognizing the complex algorithms running in the background. Natalie was essentially a user of my technical platform, someone who had learned to navigate the interface I had created without realizing that the functionality she valued so highly existed because of architectural decisions I made during late-night coding sessions. But unlike typical software users, Natalie had decided she understood enough about the system to lecture its creator about professional ambition and business strategy. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also illuminating. Her confidence in dismissing my achievements revealed how completely she had bought into conventional narratives about success, status, and professional accomplishment. Tuesday morning brought a call from Patricia, who had received my email and wanted to discuss the logistics of the upcoming revelation. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of careful concern that had made her such an effective operational leader. "Once we make the ownership structure public, there's no going back to anonymity. You'll be dealing with press inquiries, investor meetings, and all the visibility challenges we've been avoiding." I had been expecting this conversation, and I appreciated Patricia's protective instincts. For 3 years she had been the public face of TechFlow's leadership team, handling everything from board meetings to industry conferences while I focused on technical development and strategic planning. She had watched me carefully construct a business model that allowed me to maintain creative control without sacrificing personal privacy, and she understood better than anyone how much I valued the freedom that came with operating behind the scenes. "I know the risks," I told her, "but I also know that hiding indefinitely isn't sustainable. The company has grown beyond the point where we can keep explaining away the mysterious owner who never appears at public events. And honestly, I'm tired of being invisible." What I didn't tell Patricia was how much my decision was being driven by family dynamics rather than business considerations. She knew about my sister's employment at TechFlow, of course, but she didn't know about the years of subtle dismissal and condescending concern that had culminated in Monday night's public humiliation. She couldn't understand how satisfying it would be to watch Natalie's reaction when she learned that her little sister, the one who supposedly lacked professional ambition, was actually her ultimate supervisor. "What about your sister?" Patricia asked, apparently reading my thoughts. "This is going to be quite a shock for her. Have you considered how it might affect her position within the company?" The question was fair, and I had been wrestling with it since sending the email. Natalie had earned her role through legitimate effort and demonstrated competence. Her marketing strategies had contributed meaningfully to TechFlow's growth, even if she didn't understand the technical foundation that made those strategies possible. She deserved to keep her job and continue advancing based on her actual performance rather than family connections. But she also deserved to understand exactly what she had been dismissing when she lectured me about professional achievement and business success. She needed to learn that her confident assertions about my limitations were based on fundamental misunderstandings about what I had accomplished and what kind of work actually drove the company she was so proud to be part of. "Natalie will keep her position based on merit," I assured Patricia. "Her performance reviews speak for themselves. But she's also going to have to adjust her understanding of how business success actually works. This will be educational for everyone involved." Wednesday evening, I found myself cleaning my home office with unusual thoroughness, as if preparing for an important visitor. The space had evolved organically over 6 years from a simple desk and computer setup to a sophisticated command center with multiple monitors, specialized keyboards, and enough networking equipment to run a small data center. Stacks of technical manuals shared shelf space with business books, and whiteboards covered with architectural diagrams lined 2 walls. The office reflected my unconventional approach to professional life, blending serious technical work with the kind of casual comfort that would horrify traditionalists like Natalie. I worked in sweatpants and old t-shirts, kept irregular hours based on creative energy rather than scheduled meetings, and measured success through system performance metrics rather than corner office square footage. The environment was optimized for deep thinking and complex problem solving, not for impressing visitors with displays of conventional professional status. Looking around the room, I tried to imagine how it would appear to family members who had spent years assuming I was struggling to build a sustainable career. The equipment alone represented an investment that exceeded most people's annual salaries, but it was the kind of specialized technology that would be invisible to anyone who didn't understand software development. To untrained eyes, my office probably looked like an expensive hobby setup rather than the nerve center of a multi-million-dollar business operation. That disconnect between appearance and reality had been central to my ability to remain hidden for so long. People expected successful business owners to look and behave in predictable ways: formal clothing, scheduled meetings, visible markers of professional achievement. By operating outside those expectations, I had been able to build substantial wealth and influence, while flying completely under the radar of anyone who relied on conventional status signals to identify important people. The strategy had worked perfectly until it started working against me. My success at avoiding detection had become so complete that even my own family had concluded I was someone who needed their sympathy and guidance rather than their respect and recognition. The very invisibility that had protected my privacy had also enabled their condescending attitudes about my potential and achievements. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Denver feel like the center of the universe. I chose my outfit carefully, wanting to strike a balance between professional credibility and personal authenticity. The charcoal suit I selected was well-tailored but not ostentatious, paired with simple jewelry and minimal makeup. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in a corporate boardroom without appearing to be trying too hard to impress anyone. The drive to TechFlow's downtown offices felt surreal after 3 years of managing the company remotely. I had visited the building only twice since we'd moved into the space, both times after hours to review security systems and network infrastructure. Seeing it now during business hours, watching employees stream through the lobby and elevators, I felt like a tourist in my own creation. Patricia met me in the parking garage, her expression mixing excitement with nervousness. "The entire staff will be in conference room A in 20 minutes, she reported. I told them we're announcing organizational changes, but I haven't provided any details. Natalie asked if she should prepare any marketing materials for whatever we're unveiling, and I told her everything would be explained during the meeting. The image of Natalie preparing marketing materials for her own professional earthquake made me smile despite the gravity of the situation. In a few minutes, she would discover that everything she thought she knew about TechFlow's ownership and leadership structure was completely wrong, and that the sister she had been lecturing about professional ambition was actually the person who had created her job, her career trajectory, and her entire sense of workplace identity. As we walked through TechFlow's main offices, I observed my employees going about their daily routines with no idea that their lives were about to change in significant ways. The developers I had hired were debugging code I had architected. The sales team was presenting proposals based on software I had designed. The administrative staff was managing operations for a company I had built from nothing while living in a studio apartment and surviving on ramen noodles. But most importantly, Natalie was sitting in her corner office, probably putting finishing touches on quarterly reports that would showcase marketing successes achieved through promoting products I had created. In a few minutes, she would finally understand what it meant to be part of something larger than herself, and she would learn that she had been part of my vision all along. Conference Room A buzzed with the kind of anticipatory energy that always preceded major company announcements. Through the glass walls, I could see TechFlow's entire staff settling into chairs around the massive oak table, their faces displaying varying degrees of curiosity and concern. Major organizational meetings usually meant either spectacular good news or devastating changes, and nobody seemed quite sure which direction this particular gathering would lean. Natalie had positioned herself near the head of the table, her leather portfolio open and pen poised as if she were preparing to take detailed notes about whatever strategic initiative was about to be unveiled. She wore her navy power suit with the confidence of someone who considered herself an integral part of the company's leadership structure, someone whose input would naturally be sought on any significant business decisions. Her perfectly styled hair caught the afternoon light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I could see her occasionally glancing toward the door, probably wondering when the executive team would arrive to begin the presentation. Brandon Torres sat beside her, equally prepared with his own notepad and the kind of eager expression that suggested he was hoping this meeting might present opportunities for career advancement. Several other marketing team members clustered nearby, creating an informal hierarchy that reflected their departmental structure and professional relationships. The development team occupied the opposite end of the table, laptops open and already multitasking between whatever Patricia was about to announce and the code reviews that demanded their constant attention. I remained in Patricia's office, watching the scene unfold through security monitors while trying to calm the mixture of excitement and nervousness that had been building all morning. In 15 minutes, I would walk into that conference room and fundamentally alter every relationship dynamic in the building. Natalie would discover that her professional achievements were built on a foundation owned by the sister she considered directionless. Brandon would learn that his casual dismissal of my potential had been delivered in front of the person who could fire him with a single email. The entire marketing team would realize they had been promoting software created by someone they had never met, but whose sister they had been treating with polite condescension for months. But the revelation would extend far beyond simple workplace politics. This announcement would force everyone at TechFlow to reconsider their assumptions about leadership, success, and the different forms that professional achievement could take. They would have to grapple with the fact that their company's most important strategic decisions had been made by someone who worked in sweatpants from a cluttered home office, someone who measured progress through code efficiency rather than quarterly presentations. Someone who had built a thriving business while remaining completely invisible to traditional business networks. Patricia knocked on her office door and entered with the kind of purposeful stride that had made her such an effective operational leader. "It's time," she said simply, holding out a wireless microphone and the presentation remote that would control the large screen at the front of the conference room. "Are you ready for this?" The question carried multiple layers of meaning. Was I ready to abandon the anonymity that had protected my privacy for 3 years? Was I prepared to deal with the complex family dynamics that would emerge once Natalie learned the truth about my role in her professional life? Was I willing to accept the increased visibility and responsibility that would come with publicly owning a successful technology company? Most importantly, was I ready to stop hiding behind other people's assumptions about my ambitions and capabilities? "I've been ready for this longer than I realized," I told her, accepting the microphone and checking its battery level with the kind of automatic precision that came from years of managing technical details. "Let's go show them what actual leadership looks like." We walked through TechFlow's main corridor past the motivational posters and company value statements that Patricia had implemented during the early days of our expansion. The walls displayed framed articles about business automation trends, awards for customer satisfaction, and photographs from company retreats where I had been notably absent. Everything about the physical environment reflected conventional corporate culture, the kind of professional presentation that was supposed to impress clients and reassure employees that they were working for a serious organization with legitimate business credentials. The contrast between this carefully curated corporate atmosphere and my actual work environment couldn't have been more stark. While TechFlow's offices showcased polished conference rooms and ergonomic workstations, I had been developing the company's core technology from a space that looked more like a computer enthusiast's basement workshop than a Fortune 500 boardroom. While the walls here displayed mission statements about innovation and excellence, my most important breakthroughs had happened during 3 a.m. coding sessions fueled by coffee and the kind of creative obsession that couldn't be scheduled or mandated. But that disconnect was exactly what I wanted to address through this revelation. I wanted to challenge everyone's preconceptions about what successful business leadership actually required, and I wanted to demonstrate that the most important work often happened far from the spotlight and recognition that people like Natalie associated with professional achievement. As we approached Conference Room A, I could see through the glass walls that the entire staff was now assembled and waiting. The energy in the room had shifted from casual anticipation to focused attention, the kind of collective alertness that emerged when employees realized they were about to receive information that would affect their careers and daily work lives. Conversations had died down to whispered speculation, and I could see people checking their phones one last time before Patricia called the meeting to order. Natalie caught sight of us approaching and straightened in her chair, apparently preparing to demonstrate her engagement and leadership potential during whatever strategic discussion was about to unfold. She had no way of knowing that the next hour would completely redefine her understanding of her own position within the company hierarchy, or that the sister she had lectured about professional ambition was about to walk into the room as her ultimate supervisor. Patricia entered the conference room first, moving with the kind of confident authority that had made her such an effective public face for TechFlow during my years of anonymity. The room fell completely silent as she took her position at the front, and I could see employees shifting their attention from casual conversation to focused listening mode. "Thank you all for gathering this afternoon," Patricia began, her voice carrying easily through the spacious room. "As you know, TechFlow has experienced remarkable growth over the past 3 years, expanding our client base, developing new software capabilities, and establishing ourselves as a leader in business automation solutions. This success has been possible because of the dedication and creativity that each of you brings to your work every day." She paused, allowing the compliment to register while also building suspense about what was coming next. I remained in the hallway, watching through the glass as my employees, people whose salaries I paid, whose careers I had made possible, whose daily work contributed to software platforms I had architected, waited to learn about organizational changes that would affect their professional futures. However, Patricia continued, "Our growth has also created some questions about leadership structure and decision-making processes that we need to address directly. Many of you have wondered about the ownership structure of TechFlow, about who makes the ultimate strategic decisions that guide our development priorities and business direction." I could see Natalie leaning forward slightly, her pen ready to capture whatever insights about corporate governance were about to be shared. Brandon looked equally attentive, probably hoping this discussion might reveal opportunities for advancement within whatever restructured organization was being announced. The development team maintained their characteristic focus, but I could tell they were curious about whether changes in leadership might affect their project assignments or technical autonomy. "For the past 3 years," Patricia explained, "TechFlow has been guided by an owner who preferred to remain behind the scenes, focusing on technical development and strategic planning while allowing our operational team to handle daily management responsibilities. This arrangement has worked well for our development process, but it has also created some confusion about accountability and long-term vision." The room buzzed with quiet murmurs as employees processed this information. Most of them had assumed that Patricia and the other visible managers represented the company's complete leadership structure. The idea that someone else had been making strategic decisions from outside their awareness clearly came as a surprise, and I could see people exchanging glances as they tried to piece together clues they might have missed about this mysterious owner's identity. "Today," Patricia announced, "that's going to change. Our owner has decided it's time to step into a more visible leadership role, to work directly with all of you in shaping TechFlow's future direction." Please join me in welcoming Zoe Harper, founder and CEO of TechFlow Solutions. The moment stretched like a held breath as I stepped through the conference room doorway, wireless microphone in hand, facing a room full of people whose professional lives I had been quietly directing for 3 years. The silence was profound and loaded with multiple layers of shock, confusion, and recognition as employees tried to process what they had just heard. But it was Natalie's face that captured my attention completely. Her expression cycled through disbelief, confusion, and dawning horror as she realized that everything she thought she knew about TechFlow's ownership and her own position within the company hierarchy had just been revealed as fundamentally incorrect. The pen fell from her fingers, landing on her leather portfolio with a soft click that seemed unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. Brandon's mouth had fallen open slightly, his carefully prepared notepad forgotten as he stared at the woman he had casually dismissed as needing entry-level career guidance. The marketing team members, who had treated me with polite condescension during company social events, looked like they were witnessing some kind of optical illusion, unable to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the authority figure Patricia had just introduced. The development team, interestingly, seemed less surprised than everyone else. Several of them were nodding with expressions that suggested pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. They had been receiving technical guidance and architectural decisions from someone identified only as Zoe Harper, and they were probably realizing that their mysterious lead developer had been sitting in their meetings, listening to their progress reports, and approving their code commits, while everyone else assumed she was just Natalie's underachieving sister. I walked to the front of the room, allowing the silence to extend long enough for everyone to fully absorb what was happening. When I finally spoke, my voice was steady and clear, carrying none of the diffidence that people like Natalie associated with my personality. Good afternoon, everyone. I realize this comes as a surprise to most of you, and I want to take some time to explain not just who I am, but why I've chosen to reveal my role in TechFlow at this particular moment. I clicked the presentation remote, and the large screen behind me displayed a timeline showing TechFlow's development from conception through current operations. The timeline included technical milestones, revenue benchmarks, and strategic decisions that had shaped the company's growth trajectory over 6 years of development. TechFlow began as a personal project during my final year of computer science studies. I was working part-time at various service jobs, while developing automation software that could help small businesses manage their operations more efficiently. What started as a solution for a single restaurant's inventory management grew into a comprehensive platform that could streamline processes for companies across multiple industries. The screen displayed screenshots of early software prototypes, lines of code, and architectural diagrams that showed the evolution of TechFlow's core technology. I could see the development team studying these images with professional interest, probably recognizing elements of the systems they worked with daily but had never seen in their original form. Rather than trying to build a traditional startup with venture capital and public relations campaigns, I chose a different approach. I wanted to focus on creating the best possible software without the distractions and compromises that often come with high-visibility entrepreneurship. So I structured TechFlow as a company that could grow and succeed while allowing me to remain focused on technical development rather than networking events and media interviews. Natalie's face had gone pale, and I could see her struggling to reconcile this explanation with years of assumptions about my professional capabilities and ambitions. The sister she had lectured about lacking business sense had actually been running a sophisticated technology company while she was climbing what she thought was a traditional corporate ladder. This approach worked well for several years, I continued, advancing to slides that showed TechFlow's client growth and revenue expansion. We built a strong reputation for reliable software and excellent customer support. We attracted talented employees who shared our commitment to technical excellence and client satisfaction. We established ourselves as a leader in business automation without requiring the kind of public attention that often creates more problems than it solves. I paused, looking directly at Natalie as I prepared to address the more personal dimensions of my revelation. Her expression had shifted from shock to something approaching devastation as she began to understand the full implications of what she was learning. However, maintaining this level of anonymity also created some unintended consequences. People who should have known better began to make assumptions about my professional achievements and personal ambitions. Family members who should have recognized my capabilities instead offered career advice based on fundamental misunderstandings about what I had actually accomplished. The room was completely silent now, with everyone understanding that this announcement was about much more than corporate restructuring or leadership changes.
This was about respect, recognition, and the dangerous assumptions people make when they think they understand someone's potential based on superficial observations. So today marks not just a change in TechFlow's public leadership structure, but also a lesson about the importance of looking beyond appearances when evaluating success and achievement. Some of the most important work happens behind the scenes, and some of the most successful people are those who choose substance over visibility. I clicked to the final slide, which displayed TechFlow's current financial position, employee count, and market share statistics. The numbers told a story of sustained growth and profitability that would have impressed any business school case study, all achieved while the company's actual owner remained completely unknown to industry publications and networking organizations.
Moving forward, I'll be taking a more active role in TechFlow's daily operations while maintaining our commitment to technical excellence and client satisfaction. I look forward to working directly with all of you and continuing to build something we can all be proud of. The applause that followed was scattered and uncertain, with employees still processing the implications of what they had just learned. But as I looked around the room, I could see understanding beginning to replace shock on most faces. People were starting to recognize that their assumptions about leadership, success, and professional achievement had just been challenged in ways that would require serious reconsideration. Natalie remained frozen in her chair, staring at me with an expression that combined humiliation, bewilderment, and the dawning realization that everything she thought she knew about our respective places in the professional world had just been revealed as completely backwards. The sister she had been trying to educate about business success was actually the person who had created her career opportunities, funded her salary, and made possible every professional achievement she had been celebrating for the past 3 years. The aftermath of my revelation created a peculiar kind of chaos in Conference Room A. Employees began talking in hushed, urgent whispers, their voices mixing together into a low hum of confusion and amazement. Some pulled out their phones, apparently feeling the need to verify what they had just witnessed, or perhaps to share the news with colleagues who hadn't attended the meeting. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at me as if I might transform back into the unremarkable freelance designer they thought they knew. Brandon Torres was the first to find his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than his usual confident tone. "But you're just, we thought you were." He stopped himself, apparently realizing that completing his sentence would require admitting exactly how dismissively he had viewed me during our previous interactions. "You thought I was what, exactly?" I asked, my voice carrying just enough edge to make clear that this wasn't a rhetorical question. I wanted him to articulate the assumptions that had allowed him to casually suggest I might benefit from an entry-level position at my own company. Brandon's face flushed red as he struggled to find words that wouldn't make his previous comments sound even more insulting in retrospect. When Natalie talked about her sister, she said you were still trying to figure things out, career-wise. We didn't realize you had already built something so substantial. The irony of his explanation wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Natalie had been the source of their misconceptions about my professional status, confidently sharing her assessment of my limitations with colleagues who had no reason to question her expertise about her own family members. She had positioned herself as the successful Harper sister while portraying me as someone who needed guidance and sympathy, never imagining that her colleagues might someday learn the truth about who was actually funding their paychecks. I turned my attention to Natalie, who remained motionless in her chair with an expression that suggested she was still processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. Her carefully constructed professional persona, the confident marketing executive who belonged in boardrooms and strategy sessions, seemed to be crumbling in real time as she grappled with the reality that her entire career had been built within a company owned by the sister she had spent years patronizing. "Natalie," I said gently, "would you like to share your thoughts about this development?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and I could see her struggling to formulate a response that wouldn't humiliate her further in front of her colleagues. For someone who made her living through articulate presentations and persuasive communication, she seemed remarkably unable to find words adequate to the situation. Finally, she managed to whisper, "I don't understand. How long have you owned TechFlow? Why didn't you tell me?" The questions revealed the core of her confusion. She couldn't reconcile the sister who had sat quietly through years of condescending career advice with the business owner who had been making strategic decisions that affected her daily work life. In her mind, successful entrepreneurs looked and behaved in predictable ways. They wore expensive suits, attended networking events, and projected confidence through visible markers of achievement. The idea that real business success could be achieved by someone working in sweatpants from a cluttered home office challenged everything she thought she understood about professional accomplishment. I've owned TechFlow since its inception 6 years ago. I explained, allowing the timeline to sink in. As for why I didn't tell you, I think that question answers itself. How would you have reacted 3 years ago if I had tried to explain that I was running a technology company? Would you have believed me, or would you have assumed I was delusional about the scope of my freelance design work? The question forced her to confront the depth of her misconceptions about my capabilities and ambitions. 3 years ago, when she was celebrating her first promotion at TechFlow, she had been living in a reality where her struggling sister couldn't possibly be the mysterious owner whose strategic decisions were driving the company's success. She had constructed such a complete narrative about our respective professional trajectories that any suggestion of a different truth would have seemed absurd. Patricia stepped forward, apparently recognizing that the personal family dynamics were threatening to overshadow the business implications of my announcement. I think this might be a good time to address some practical questions about how this revelation will affect daily operations and reporting structures, she suggested diplomatically. But I wasn't quite ready to move past the interpersonal consequences of what had just been revealed. For 3 years, I had endured subtle dismissals and condescending encouragement from family members who thought they understood my professional limitations. I had sat through countless gatherings where Natalie's achievements were celebrated while my own work was treated as a hobby that I might eventually outgrow if I could develop proper business instincts. Actually, Patricia, I think it's important that we address the assumptions that led to this situation, I said, maintaining eye contact with Natalie. Because what happened here isn't just about family misunderstandings. It's about the broader tendency to dismiss people whose success doesn't conform to traditional expectations. I clicked the presentation remote, and the screen behind me displayed a series of headlines from industry publications that had written about TechFlow's growth without ever identifying its actual owner. For 3 years, business journalists have been speculating about the leadership philosophy behind TechFlow's success. They've written articles about our innovative approach to customer service, our efficient development processes, and our ability to scale operations without sacrificing quality. The headlines told a story that everyone in the room could appreciate. TechFlow had become a respected player in the business automation industry, earning recognition for technical excellence and customer satisfaction. But none of the articles had identified me as the driving force behind these achievements, instead crediting vague references to visionary leadership and strategic focus without connecting those qualities to any specific individual. What these articles couldn't explain, I continued, was how a relatively small company could consistently outperform larger competitors with more resources and bigger marketing budgets. They couldn't understand how we maintained such high customer retention rates while developing new features so rapidly. They were looking for the secret to our success in conference rooms and corporate strategies, when the real answer was happening in a home office that most of them would have dismissed as unprofessional. The development team was nodding with visible recognition, apparently understanding now why their mysterious lead developer had always seemed to anticipate technical challenges before they became critical problems. They had been receiving guidance from someone who understood every aspect of the software architecture because she had designed it from the ground up, not from someone who had learned about it through presentations and status reports. This matters, I emphasized, because it illustrates how easy it is to overlook genuine achievement when it doesn't match our preconceptions about what success should look like. Natalie assumed I lacked professional ambition because I didn't pursue visible markers of corporate advancement. Industry analysts couldn't identify TechFlow's competitive advantages because they were looking for conventional business strategies rather than technical innovation driven by someone working outside traditional corporate structures. Natalie finally found her voice, though it came out strained and defensive. But you never said anything. You let me think. You let everyone think you were struggling to build a sustainable career. How was I supposed to know you were running a successful company if you kept it secret? The accusation contained enough validity to sting, and I had to acknowledge that my commitment to anonymity had created the conditions that allowed her misconceptions to flourish. By choosing to remain invisible, I had essentially given her permission to construct whatever narrative about my professional life seemed most plausible based on superficial observations. You're right that I kept my role at TechFlow private, I admitted. But your assumptions about my capabilities and ambitions went far beyond what could be explained by lack of information. You decided I was someone who needed career guidance and professional development, someone whose lifestyle represented a failure to engage seriously with the business world. Those conclusions weren't based on missing data, they were based on prejudices about what meaningful work looks like and who gets to be considered successful. The room fell silent again as employees absorbed the implications of this exchange.
They were witnessing more than a family argument. They were seeing a fundamental challenge to conventional wisdom about professional achievement and business leadership. The quiet sister, who had been dismissed as lacking ambition, had just revealed herself as someone who had built something more substantial than most of them would accomplish in entire careers. Marcus Chen, one of the senior developers, raised his hand tentatively. So when we've been getting technical guidance from Zoe Harper through the development channels, that was actually you. The question opened up a new dimension of the revelation. For months, the development team had been collaborating with someone they knew only through encrypted communications and code reviews. Zoe Harper had provided architectural guidance, approved major system changes, and occasionally jumped into complex debugging sessions that kept their enterprise clients happy. The mysterious lead developer had demonstrated an intuitive understanding of the software platform that exceeded what most people could achieve through documentation and training. That's correct, I confirmed. I've been reviewing your code commits, approving infrastructure changes, and participating in design discussions while maintaining separate identities for family and business purposes. Some of your best architectural solutions came from collaborative sessions where you didn't realize you were working directly with the person who designed the original systems. The revelation created visible excitement among the technical staff, who apparently found it fascinating that their mysterious collaborator had been present at company social events and family gatherings while maintaining her anonymity. They began exchanging glances and whispered comments as they remembered technical discussions that suddenly made more sense in light of this new information. But the excitement among the developers highlighted the dismay that was becoming increasingly apparent among the marketing and administrative staff. They were realizing that their assessment of my professional competence had been not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. The person they had treated with polite condescension was actually the ultimate authority figure in their professional lives, someone whose approval they needed for career advancement and whose strategic vision determined their job security. Brandon looked particularly uncomfortable as he apparently remembered specific conversations where he had offered unsolicited advice about my career prospects. When I suggested you might apply for an entry-level position here, he said slowly, you must have thought I was completely out of touch with reality. Actually, I replied, I thought it was an interesting insight into how assumptions about professional competence can blind people to obvious contradictions. You were suggesting that someone who clearly had enough technical knowledge to discuss your software platform in detail might benefit from entry-level training in the same industry. It never occurred to you to wonder how I had acquired that knowledge, or why someone with my apparent limitations was able to ask such sophisticated questions about business automation strategies. The observation forced him to confront the intellectual laziness that had enabled his condescending attitude. He had noticed evidence that contradicted his assumptions about my professional capabilities, but instead of questioning those assumptions, he had simply ignored the contradictory information. It was easier to maintain his existing narrative about the struggling freelancer than to consider the possibility that his understanding of the situation might be fundamentally flawed. This is exactly why I chose to reveal my role at this particular moment, I explained to the room at large. Because the assumptions that led to this situation are about more than family dynamics or workplace politics. They're about the broader tendency to dismiss people whose success doesn't conform to traditional expectations, and about the danger of confusing visibility with achievement. I clicked to a new slide showing TechFlow's financial performance compared to industry competitors. The numbers told a story of consistent profitability and growth that outpaced companies with much higher public profiles and larger marketing budgets. We had achieved this success through technical excellence and customer focus rather than through networking events and industry conferences. But the traditional business community had largely overlooked our achievements because they couldn't identify conventional leadership structures or marketing strategies. TechFlow succeeds because we prioritize substance over appearance, results over recognition, and long-term value creation over short-term publicity. I continued. These priorities guided my decision to remain anonymous, but they also created conditions where people could assume that invisible work was unimportant work, and that unconventional approaches to business leadership indicated lack of serious professional commitment. Natalie had been listening to this explanation with an expression that mixed humiliation with growing anger. Finally, she exploded with the kind of emotional intensity that had been building throughout the revelation. "This isn't fair," she shouted, her voice carrying across the conference room with startling force. "You made me look like an idiot in front of my colleagues. You let me embarrass myself by talking about your lack of ambition when you knew the whole time that you owned the company I work for. The outburst revealed the depth of her mortification, but it also demonstrated that she still hadn't grasped the fundamental lesson this experience was supposed to teach. She was focused on her own embarrassment, rather than on the broader implications of what had been revealed about her judgment, her assumptions, and her treatment of someone she should have respected regardless of their apparent professional status. "Natalie," I said quietly, "you made yourself look foolish by making confident pronouncements about subjects you didn't understand. I didn't force you to lecture me about professional ambition, business strategy, or the importance of engaging with meaningful work. You chose to position yourself as an authority on success while dismissing achievements you couldn't see or didn't recognize." The confrontation had reached a critical juncture, and I could see that everyone in the room understood they were witnessing something that would reshape relationships and power dynamics for years to come. This wasn't just about correcting misconceptions or revealing hidden information, it was about accountability, respect, and the consequences of treating people badly based on assumptions about their worth and potential. The silence that followed my words stretched uncomfortably through conference room A as Natalie absorbed the full weight of what I had said. Her face cycled through emotions like a storm system: anger, shame, disbelief, and finally something that looked like the beginning of genuine understanding. The rest of the TechFlow staff sat frozen in their chairs, caught between their loyalty to a colleague they had worked with for years and their dawning recognition that colleague had fundamentally misjudged someone who now held ultimate authority over their professional futures. Patricia cleared her throat diplomatically, apparently sensing that the family confrontation needed to be separated from the business implications of my revelation. "Perhaps we should adjourn the general meeting and continue discussions about operational changes in smaller groups," she suggested. "This gives everyone time to process what we've learned and ask more specific questions about how the leadership transition will affect their daily responsibilities." But Natalie wasn't ready to let the moment pass without a more complete reckoning with what had been revealed. She stood up slowly, her hands trembling slightly as she gathered her portfolio and pen. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly in the hushed conference room. "I need to understand something," she said, looking directly at me with an expression that mixed desperation with the beginnings of genuine humility. "If you built this company, if you've been making the strategic decisions that shaped my career here, why did you let me go on thinking I was the successful one? Why didn't you correct me when I was when I was treating you like—" She couldn't finish the sentence, apparently unable to articulate exactly how she had been treating me without making her behavior sound even worse than it already appeared to everyone watching. But her inability to complete the thought was actually more powerful than any specific admission might have been. Everyone in the room could fill in the blanks based on what they had witnessed of our family dynamics over the past 3 years. "Because I wanted to see who you really were," I replied, my voice gentle but unwavering. "I wanted to understand what kind of person you would become if you believed you had achieved success through your own efforts, if you thought you had earned the right to judge other people's choices and capabilities." The answer turned out to be someone who used perceived professional advantage to dismiss and belittle family members who didn't conform to your expectations about achievement. The assessment was harsh but accurate, and I could see from Natalie's expression that she recognized the truth in it even if she wished she could deny it. For 3 years, she had used her position at TechFlow as evidence of her superior business acumen, her better understanding of professional success, her greater engagement with meaningful work. She had leveraged that apparent advantage to position herself as someone qualified to offer career guidance to a sister she considered less ambitious and less capable. "But more importantly," I continued, "I wanted to see whether you would recognize that someone's worth and potential can't be measured by visible markers of conventional success. I hoped that eventually you would realize that treating service workers, freelancers, or anyone else with condescension said more about your character than it did about their achievements." The room remained completely silent as employees absorbed this exchange. They were witnessing something far more significant than a family argument or workplace drama. This was a fundamental examination of values, assumptions, and the basis on which people earned respect and recognition from their communities. Brandon Torres, who had been sitting frozen throughout the confrontation, finally found the courage to speak. "Zoe, I owe you an enormous apology," he said, his voice thick with embarrassment. "The things I said about entry-level positions and career guidance, I was completely out of line, and I had no business making assumptions about your professional experience or capabilities." His apology opened the floodgates for similar acknowledgments from other employees who had treated me with polite condescension during company social events. One by one, they began to recognize specific moments when they had made comments or assumptions that now seemed not just wrong but actively insulting. the marketing coordinator who had offered unsolicited advice about networking strategies, the sales manager who had suggested I might enjoy administrative work since it seemed less demanding than business development, the administrative assistant who had repeatedly asked whether I was still doing the freelance thing as if it were a phase I might eventually outgrow. Each acknowledgement revealed how completely they had bought into Natalie's narrative about our respective professional trajectories. She had been their primary source of information about my career and achievements, and they had trusted her assessment without questioning whether someone's own sister might have biases or blind spots that affected her judgment. They had allowed her confidence about her own success to convince them that she was qualified to evaluate other people's potential and accomplishments. But as I watched these apologies unfold, I realized that simply accepting them and moving on would miss the deeper opportunity this moment presented. These people needed to understand not just that they had misjudged me personally, but that their approach to evaluating success and worth was fundamentally flawed and potentially harmful. I appreciate the apologies, I said, but I'm more interested in what you've learned about the assumptions that led to this situation. Because this isn't really about me or my hurt feelings. It's about the broader tendency to dismiss people whose achievements don't conform to traditional expectations, and about the danger of confusing visibility with value.
I moved to the whiteboard at the front of the conference room and began writing a simple equation: conventional visibility equals assumed competence. Below it, I added, unconventional success equals assumed failure. This is the mental framework that created the problem we're addressing today, I explained. Natalie achieved visible success within a traditional corporate structure, so everyone assumed she was competent and qualified to evaluate other people's professional choices. I achieved substantial success through unconventional means while maintaining privacy, so everyone assumed I was struggling and needed guidance. The visual representation made the logical fallacy obvious to everyone in the room. They had been using the wrong criteria to evaluate achievement and potential, focusing on appearance rather than substance, recognition rather than results. The framework had led them to dismiss someone who had created more economic value than most of them would generate in their entire careers, while elevating someone whose achievements were ultimately dependent on work she didn't understand or appreciate. Marcus Chen raised his hand tentatively. So how do we avoid making these kinds of mistakes in the future? He asked. How do we recognize achievement that doesn't follow traditional patterns? The question demonstrated exactly the kind of thinking I had been hoping to encourage. Instead of simply apologizing for past errors, he was trying to understand the broader principles that could guide better judgment in future situations. He wanted to learn from this experience rather than just surviving the immediate awkwardness. Start by questioning your assumptions, I suggested. When you meet someone whose lifestyle or career choices don't match your expectations about success, ask yourself what you might not be seeing, rather than concluding that they've failed to achieve meaningful accomplishments. Remember that some of the most important work happens behind the scenes, and some of the most successful people choose substance over visibility. I turned back to the whiteboard and added another equation: questions, assumptions. Below it, curiosity, judgment. If Brandon had approached our conversations with curiosity instead of assumptions, I continued, he might have asked how I had acquired such detailed knowledge about business automation software. If Natalie had questioned her conclusions instead of feeling confident about them, she might have wondered why someone she considered professionally unsuccessful seemed so unconcerned about financial security. The lesson was beginning to resonate with people throughout the room. I could see employees reflecting on their own experiences with assumptions and snap judgments, probably remembering times when they had dismissed people who later proved to be more capable or accomplished than initial impressions suggested. But it was Natalie's reaction that mattered most to me. She had been listening to this discussion with growing intensity, and I could see that something fundamental was shifting in her understanding of what had happened and what it meant for how she approached relationships with other people. I think I'm beginning to understand, she said slowly, her voice carrying a new quality of thoughtfulness that I hadn't heard from her in years. This isn't just about you being successful in ways I didn't recognize. It's about me using my own success as permission to judge other people without really knowing what their lives were like or what they had accomplished. The insight was exactly what I had been hoping she would reach, and hearing her articulate it gave me more satisfaction than all the shocked faces and stammered apologies combined. She was finally grasping that the problem wasn't just factual ignorance about my professional achievements, it was a character flaw that had allowed her to treat people badly based on assumptions about their worth and potential. Yes, I confirmed. And it's about recognizing that someone's value as a person doesn't depend on their professional status, their income level, or their conformity to conventional expectations about success. The barista who served you coffee this morning, the janitor who cleaned this conference room last night, the freelance designer you thought was struggling to build a sustainable career, all of these people deserve respect and consideration regardless of how their achievements compare to your own. Natalie nodded slowly, and I could see tears forming in her eyes as she fully absorbed the implications of what I was saying. For 3 years she had been unconsciously using her position at TechFlow as evidence of her superior judgment and greater worth as a person. She had treated service workers, family members, and anyone else she perceived as less successful with the kind of casual dismissal that reflected deep problems with empathy and humility. "I've been horrible," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of genuine recognition rather than performative self-criticism. "Not just to you but to so many people. I used my job here as proof that I was better than other people, smarter than other people, more deserving of respect than other people. And the whole time, the person I was being most condescending to was actually the person who had made my success possible." The acknowledgement represented a breakthrough that went far beyond our personal relationship. She was recognizing patterns of behavior and thought that had affected how she treated everyone from restaurant servers to family members to colleagues she considered less important than herself. She was beginning to understand that professional achievement didn't grant permission to judge other people's choices or dismiss their potential. Patricia, who had been watching this exchange with the kind of careful attention that made her such an effective manager, stepped forward with a practical suggestion. "I think this might be an appropriate time to discuss how we want to structure ongoing operations," she said. "Zoe, how do you envision your day-to-day involvement with TechFlow now that your ownership is public knowledge?" The question helped transition our focus from personal dynamics to business implications, but I wanted to make sure the broader lessons weren't lost in operational details. This revelation needed to create lasting change in how people at TechFlow thought about success, achievement, and the treatment of others. "My technical involvement will remain largely the same," I explained. "I'll continue developing software architecture, reviewing code, and making strategic decisions about product development. But I also want to implement some changes that reflect the values we've been discussing today." I clicked the presentation remote, and the screen displayed a new slide titled TechFlow Values Initiative. The slide contained several bullet points that outlined programs I had been considering for months, but had never felt ready to implement while maintaining my anonymity. "First, we're going to establish a rotation program where every employee, regardless of their role or seniority level, spends 1 day each quarter in a different position within the company. Developers will answer customer service calls. Managers will work alongside our cleaning staff. Sales representatives will assist with technical support. Everyone will gain direct experience with the full range of work that keeps TechFlow operating successfully." The announcement created visible excitement among some employees and obvious concern among others. The developers seemed intrigued by the opportunity to interact directly with customers whose problems they were trying to solve. The management team looked less enthusiastic about the prospect of demonstrating their willingness to engage with work they might consider beneath their professional status. "Second," I continued, "we're going to partner with local community colleges and trade schools to provide internships and mentorship opportunities for students who might not have traditional paths into the technology industry. We'll focus especially on people whose backgrounds or circumstances might lead others to underestimate their potential for technical careers." This initiative had been inspired partly by my own experience of being dismissed despite substantial achievements, but more broadly by recognition that the technology industry often overlooked talented people whose potential wasn't obvious through conventional evaluation methods. Too many capable individuals were being written off because they didn't fit expected profiles for technical success. Finally, I announced, we're going to establish an annual award recognizing employees who demonstrate exceptional respect and consideration for colleagues, clients, and community members, regardless of their professional status or social position. The award won't be based on technical achievements or business results, but on character qualities that create positive environments where everyone can do their best work. The 3 initiatives were designed to institutionalize the lessons that had emerged from my revelation, creating ongoing reminders that success was about more than individual achievement, and that respect was something everyone deserved, regardless of their position in professional or social hierarchies. Brandon raised his hand again. "Will these programs be optional, or will participation be required for continued employment?" The question revealed that he was still thinking about this primarily in terms of personal consequences rather than broader principles, but I appreciated his directness about concerns that other people were probably harboring without expressing explicitly. Participation in the rotation program will be required, I confirmed. If someone believes that certain types of work are beneath them, then they probably aren't a good fit for TechFlow's culture. The mentorship and community college partnerships will be voluntary, but we'll certainly notice who chooses to get involved and who doesn't. The answer sent a clear message about expectations and values without being explicitly threatening. People who embraced the new initiatives would demonstrate alignment with TechFlow's evolving culture. People who resisted or complained would reveal attitudes that might need to be addressed through coaching or ultimately employment decisions. Natalie had been listening to these announcements with obvious fascination, apparently recognizing that the programs were designed to address exactly the kind of character flaws she had been exhibiting for years. When she spoke, her voice carried a new quality of genuine humility that I found encouraging. "I'd like to volunteer to help coordinate the community college partnerships," she said. "I think I have a lot to learn about recognizing potential in people whose backgrounds don't match traditional expectations, and I'd appreciate the opportunity to work on developing better judgment and more inclusive perspectives." The offer represented exactly the kind of response I had been hoping for. Instead of simply apologizing for past behavior, she was volunteering to engage with work that would actively challenge her assumptions and help her develop the character qualities she had been lacking. She was taking responsibility for changing patterns of thought and behavior that had caused real harm to her relationships with other people. "I think that would be valuable for everyone involved," I replied. "You'll be working directly with people whose talent and potential might not be obvious through traditional evaluation methods, and you'll have opportunities to practice the kind of respectful, supportive interaction that should characterize all our professional relationships." The meeting continued for another hour, as we discussed practical details about leadership transitions, communication strategies, and timeline for implementing the new initiatives. But the core transformation had already taken place. Everyone in the room understood that their assumptions about success, achievement, and professional worth had been fundamentally challenged, and that moving forward would require different approaches to evaluating and interacting with other people. As employees began filing out of Conference Room A, several stopped to speak with me individually. Some offered additional apologies for past comments or assumptions. Others asked questions about technical aspects of TechFlow's software that they had never understood. A few expressed excitement about the new initiatives and volunteered to help with implementation planning. But it was the conversation with Marcus Chen that provided the most insight into how the revelation was being processed by people who hadn't been directly involved in the family dynamics. He approached me with the kind of respectful curiosity that suggested he was genuinely trying to learn from what had happened rather than simply managing an awkward social situation. "I keep thinking about all the times we collaborated on technical problems through the encrypted channels," he said. "You were always able to suggest solutions that were more elegant and efficient than what the rest of us had developed, but you never made us feel stupid for not seeing those approaches immediately. How did you maintain that balance between expertise and humility when you could have just told us you owned the company and expected us to defer to your judgment?" The question demonstrated exactly the kind of reflection I had been hoping the revelation would inspire. He was thinking about leadership, collaboration, and the relationship between authority and effectiveness in ways that went far beyond the immediate drama of family misunderstandings and workplace politics. Because the goal was never to prove that I was smarter or more capable than anyone else, I explained. The goal was to build the best possible software by combining everyone's expertise and creativity. Pulling rank or demanding deference would have undermined that objective even if it made me feel more important in the moment. He nodded thoughtfully. "So real leadership is about creating conditions where everyone can contribute their best work, not about making sure everyone knows who's in charge." "Exactly, and real success is about creating value and solving problems, not about accumulating recognition or social status. The most important work often happens quietly, behind the scenes, without fanfare or public acknowledgement." As Marcus walked away, I noticed that Natalie had remained in the conference room while everyone else departed. She was sitting alone at the large table, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at downtown Denver's afternoon skyline. Her posture suggested someone who was processing something much larger than a single surprising revelation about family dynamics. I joined her at the table, settling into a chair that provided a similar view of the city where we had both built our careers in such different ways.
For several minutes we sat in comfortable silence, watching traffic move through streets far below, while each processing the implications of what had transpired. "I've been thinking about Mom and Dad," Natalie finally said, her voice quiet and reflective. "About all the family dinners where they celebrated my promotions and achievements while treating your work like a hobby you might eventually outgrow. They had no idea what you had actually accomplished, and I was the one who convinced them to see you that way." The observation revealed another dimension of the damage that had been caused by her assumptions and dismissive attitude. Our parents' perception of our respective achievements had been shaped largely by Natalie's confident assessments of my professional limitations. They had trusted her judgment about business and career success, allowing her narrative about our different trajectories to influence how they interacted with both of their daughters. "They meant well," I said. "They were proud of your visible achievements and concerned about what they perceived as my lack of conventional success. But you're right that their understanding of the situation was influenced by your interpretation of what my lifestyle and choices represented." She nodded sadly. "I was so convinced that I understood what success looked like, what professional achievement required, what separated serious business people from hobbyists and dreamers. I never questioned whether my framework for evaluation might be incomplete or biased. I just assumed that because I had achieved something recognizable, I was qualified to judge everyone else's efforts and potential." The insight represented genuine growth in self-awareness, and I found myself feeling hopeful about the possibility for rebuilding our relationship on a foundation of mutual respect rather than perceived superiority and inferiority. She was beginning to understand that the problem hadn't been factual ignorance about my achievements, but character flaws that had allowed her to treat people badly based on assumptions about their worth. "What happens now?" she asked. "How do we move forward from this? How do I repair the damage I've caused not just with you, but with everyone I've treated dismissively over the years?" The question suggested that she was thinking beyond our immediate family dynamics to broader patterns of behavior that had affected her relationships with colleagues, service workers, and anyone else she had encountered while feeling confident about her superior judgment and achievements. "You start by changing how you interact with people moving forward," I suggested. "You approach every relationship with curiosity instead of assumptions, with respect instead of judgment. You recognize that someone's worth as a person has nothing to do with their professional status or their conformity to your expectations about success." She was quiet for a long moment, apparently considering the practical implications of what I was suggesting. Changing fundamental approaches to social interaction would require sustained effort and constant self-monitoring, especially for someone who had spent years operating from a position of assumed superiority. "I want to do better," she said finally. "Not just because of what happened today, but because I'm beginning to understand that the person I've been isn't someone I'm proud of. I used my job here as permission to look down on other people, and that's not who I want to be." The commitment sounded genuine, and I felt optimistic about her ability to follow through on it. The shock of learning about my actual role at TechFlow had created an opening for self-reflection that might not have been possible under different circumstances. Sometimes people needed dramatic wake-up calls to recognize patterns of behavior they had been unconsciously perpetuating for years. 3 months later, the changes at TechFlow had exceeded my most optimistic expectations. The rotation program had initially generated some resistance from employees who considered certain tasks beneath their professional status, but those attitudes had shifted quickly once people experienced the full range of work required to keep the company operating successfully. Developers who spent a day handling customer service calls gained new appreciation for the complexity of user experience design. Managers who worked alongside maintenance staff developed better understanding of operational challenges that affected everyone's work environment. The community college partnerships had attracted enthusiastic participation from employees who discovered they enjoyed mentoring and teaching. Natalie had thrown herself into the program with the kind of dedication that suggested genuine commitment to changing her approach to evaluating and supporting other people. Her monthly reports detailed interactions with students whose potential might have been overlooked by traditional hiring processes, and her recommendations had led to several successful internship placements. Most importantly, the culture shift had created ripple effects that extended far beyond TechFlow's immediate operations. Employees reported changed interactions with service workers, family members, and community members, as they applied lessons about respect and assumption challenging to their personal relationships. The annual Character Award had generated nominations that told stories of kindness, consideration, and support that demonstrated how professional environments could reinforce positive values rather than just rewarding individual achievement. At our family's next gathering, the dynamics had shifted dramatically from the dinner that had precipitated my revelation. Instead of celebrating conventional markers of professional success while offering sympathy for perceived failures, our conversations focused on meaningful work, community contribution, and the different forms that achievement could take. Natalie had become genuinely curious about other people's experiences and perspectives, asking questions that demonstrated respect rather than judgment. The transformation hadn't been immediate or easy. Changing fundamental assumptions about success and worth required sustained effort and constant self-reflection. But it had been possible, and the results had enriched not just our family relationships but our broader connections with communities and colleagues. As I sat in my home office late one evening, reviewing TechFlow's quarterly reports while rain drummed against the windows, I reflected on the unexpected consequences of my decision to reveal the truth about my role in the company. I had initially been motivated by frustration with years of dismissive treatment and condescending career advice, but the revelation had created opportunities for growth and learning that extended far beyond my personal satisfaction with proving people wrong. The experience had taught me something important about the relationship between privacy and responsibility. While I had valid reasons for maintaining anonymity during TechFlow's early development, my commitment to remaining invisible had eventually enabled harmful assumptions and behaviors that affected real people in real ways. Sometimes the most meaningful form of leadership required stepping into visibility even when it felt uncomfortable or inconvenient. But more fundamentally, the entire experience had demonstrated the importance of questioning assumptions about success, achievement, and human worth. Too many capable people were being dismissed or underestimated because their accomplishments didn't conform to traditional expectations. Too many relationships were being damaged by judgments based on superficial observations rather than genuine understanding. The lesson applied far beyond family dynamics or workplace politics. In a world where success was increasingly being defined by visibility and recognition rather than substance and value creation, it was more important than ever to remember that the most meaningful achievements often happen quietly, behind the scenes, through the patient work of people who chose impact over image. My phone buzzed with a text message from Natalie. Just finished reviewing applications for next semester's mentorship program. These students are incredible. I can't believe how much I've learned about recognizing potential in unexpected places. Thank you for giving me the chance to become a better person. I smiled as I typed back, thank you for being willing to do the work to change. That's what real success looks like. Outside, the rain continued falling on Denver's quiet streets, and I returned to my code reviews with the satisfaction that came from building something meaningful while surrounded by people who finally understood what that meant. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.